With this recording, I'm doing an experiment where I up the settings in OBS. What I mean by that is I used to be recording at 30 frames per second, and I was downsampling a little bit. For this particular one episode, I'm recording at 60 frames per second, and not downsampling at all. So the game is going to have the same resolution as my screen. Now, that given, it's going to actually upsample a bit because the game doesn't actually take up the entirety of my screen. So it's going to take up all the pixels. The recording's going to just have how many pixels are recorded by the window that it's recording, however many pixels that is. And we're going to see if the computer chokes on that or whether it's able to handle it. Now, you would think if you record at the highest possible resolution, you wouldn't have to downsample, but that would save you time. I mean, that would save you computation power, but I don't know if OBS is smart enough to utilize that fact, or whether or not it just tries to downsample from the maximum resolution, from the screen resolution, just to, you know what I mean, just to like the same resolution. So apply like the bicubic filter, but not actually reduce the resolution. So we're just trying it as an experiment and see what happens. It's going to make an absurdly large file, which is going to make it difficult to upload. But just this once I can upload something absurdly large. I've done it before in the past with The Legend of Matanui. That stuff was brutally large. It took me a week to upload. My internet that I'm using to upload these things is obsolete DSL. And so, well, it takes about a day per gigabyte to perform an upload. So if I somehow come up with a 28 gigabyte video file, which I haven't tried to upload yet, something like that yet, but I could, I guess, that would take me about a month to finish the upload. What else was I going to say about downsampling? Oh, the reason why I'm doing this is because looking at some of my old World's Hardest Game footage, it looks pretty choppy to me. Now, part of the reason why that's the case is just this game is choppy in general. So if the footage is choppy, well, it's just because I'm recording a choppy game. But I'm figuring that 30 FPS might be contributing to the choppiness looking, so I'm going to try a higher FPS in order to make it look less choppy. I did go out and buy and chunk a bunch of money down on a, I don't know if anybody talks like that, but on a 280 hertz monitor. And I did that in an attempt that when I mailed my more powerful system, I can record at 280 hertz. Again, that would make an absurd file size, or maybe just something faster than 60 hertz. The model of laptop I'm using has a 20 hertz display that's optional, according to a sticker. Well, if it's optional, does it have it or not? I don't know. I'm presuming because OBS can only record at 60 hertz, that there's something that's restricting it to 60 hertz. It might actually be the display. I might actually be playing this on only a 60 hertz monitor. So hopefully we can up the hertz. But I might be able to up the hertz practically in the end because that might make the file size impractically large. But whatever. At least it'll up the hertz for me playing. I'm also saving the file into my SSD as opposed to the HDD to avoid that annoying HDD noise in the background while recording. And hopefully not have issues with the drive speed bottlenecking my recording process. That being said, it might anyway. Now, given I don't have a very fast SSD, it's probably only about 500 gigabytes per second. It's not an 8.2 form factor SSD, it's just a laptop one. I did buy one of those Samsung 970 Evo Pluses, PCIe 3.0 SSDs that, has a 3 wait, did I say 500 gigabytes? I mean 500 megabytes per second. You probably know what I mean. If you know anything about drives, it's 500 megabytes per second. One of those 2 terabyte Samsung 970 Evo Plus, which is like just the standard M.2 form factor SSD that everybody gets, and that has a write speed of 3 gigabytes per second, which isn't the max you could possibly do on PCIe 3.0. However, there's something about the ASUS compatibility list that motivated me to buy that one as opposed to a faster one. And I don't have PCIe 4.0 because that's only available on AMD platforms and just recently, and it's expensive. So how fast I'm going to do on the write is just going to be 3 gigabits per second, and that should gigabytes per second. That should be plenty fast to record into. I won't have problems with the hard drive bottlenecking the recording. If anybody ever worries about that. But I'm switching to the SSD because my SSD isn't very big. That means I'm going to have to move the files to the HDD once I'm done. But the rate at which I can move files to the HDD is not recording. I just transfer the files, so I don't have to do it in real time, so I don't have a bottleneck problem. I don't know if that'll help the smoothness, but we'll see. It's just an experiment. We're just going to throw a whole bunch of things at it at once and not know which fixed the problem. Still haven't moved platforms yet because I don't have a graphics card. I tried to convince my family to allow me to go through extreme measures to try to get one, but that's not going well, so, yeah. I did notice that changing GPUs from the embedded graphics to the 1060 mobile, which doesn't actually improve the choppiness. In fact, if anything, it might actually make it worse. I'm still using the 1060, but that didn't really help anything. If anything, it made it worse. Like I don't think it made it worse, but I was definitely not impressed with the output product that I was getting. My voice also is. There's just this thing that's very well known about people, that they don't like the sound of their own voice. When I first heard my voice being recorded, it was recorded with an iPhone, so it was pretty low, and it was one of the older ones. It was pretty low quality recording. And my impression of it at the time was it sounds like a kid trying to artificially make their voice sound lower. So it's like I was talking like this, but not doing a very good job. Like I wasn't frying it. I wasn't frying the voice. I was just trying to make it big and tubby. Now, with a better microphone setup besides that iPhone, well, I have to upgrade the microphone too, but I probably won't because I just bought it recently. My voice loses that whole little kid trying to make their voice sound deep quality, which is good. So I guess that's not real. It's not something people hear in my voice. But I do tend to notice that it tends to sound worn out and tired, which is kind of interesting. Don't know really what to make of that. Maybe I've been pushing it too hard in my life. I don't like sing or anything. So, well, I do, but like as normal people would casually. I'm not a choir person. And I haven't been a cheerleader, obviously. Well, there are male cheerleaders, so that wasn't a good. Not so obviously haven't been a cheerleader. So I haven't really done a whole lot to ruin my voice, but it has this tiredness and this grittiness. So, not the worst thing. At least that's better than kid trying to make their voice sound deep. When I was in high school, a group of like a gaggle of miscellaneous girls walked up to me while I was standing in a lunch line and said, "I've heard your voice. It's very deep." And I was like, okay. My voice is not very deep, if you were wondering. But for some reason, somebody told that group of girls that that guy over there, his voice is deep, which is goofy. So I do have a Lego Ideas account. So just recently, I have been voting in those Lego Ideas polls, where Lego asks the fans to vote on what theme they want to see for some sort of special 90th anniversary set. Yeah, 90 is not a very nice round number. You would think they would say this for the 100th anniversary of Lego set, but for some reason it's the 90th. And they had a list of my favorite theme, of course, which, as I've said in previous segments of this, is Technic, wasn't on the list because the only things on the list were discontinued themes, and Technic is still going. So the closest thing they had there is Model Team, which, if you're not familiar with what Model Team is, it's very similar to some of those creator expert models they make. Maybe Model Team still exists, but like in a different name. Because it's they're cars and trucks, but they're built with system. So a good reference might be some of the more modern sets, such as the Volkswagen camper van, which actually isn't that modern. It's probably been a while since that came out, or that Volkswagen Beetle. Those sets where they're cars but system. Because you might think, when it comes to cars, the first thing you might think of is Technic. But they were large in scale, and typically they had much less functionality than the Technic sets. I believe most of them, if not all, just had steering. So they had a steering wheel that was mechanically connected to the front wheels, and that was about it. They didn't even have the dummy engines in them. Like for a Technic set, the minimum functionality you will see is steering, and also if you roll the car, there's a drive shaft that will go to it's not a whole engine, it's just a model of an engine block and crankshaft. So you get this kind of cutout engine. And you see, earlier it was gray, and then more recently yellow pistons move. As you roll the vehicle, the drivetrain goes in the reverse direction. They just had steering. Anyway, so that's the closest you could get to making a Technic-like set, so getting like a big system vehicle. Now, of course, there was 2 rounds and that did not win. The other thing I voted for was obviously Bionicle, because that's my second favorite theme, and, it was actually on the list, as opposed to Technic, which was not on the list because it's not discontinued. Now, that's kind of interesting, because there's a group of Lego fans out there who will get very upset by the idea of Bionicle being the 90th anniversary set, mostly just because they don't like Bionicle. And then they'll say stuff like, well, Bionicle's not a very good representation of the 90 years of Lego because it's such a niche thing that doesn't really represent Lego very much. Well, it's true, it's very niche and specialized. It's not something that represents Lego in general over 90 years. However, you're probably saying that people don't tend to have a lot of intellectual honesty and consistency. You're probably making that argument simply because you just don't like Bionicle. And you're trying to put some logic in there. People just kind of vote for what they like, and not for what they don't like, really. And then they'll come up with some sort of weird, like they think they have to write something rational to justify their actions and their votes, or they're complaining about other people's votes more specifically, when everybody who's reading those will know that you're making those arguments because you just don't like that thing. And so I don't know why people think they bother to write those things, but it's kind of funny. So the whole topic matter of is Bionicle real Lego is kind of like irrelevant to anything and not really a real, I don't really care. But it depends on what you consider real Lego, and usually what you consider real Lego is the type of Lego that you like and you grew up with as a kid, and nothing else. That being said, what Bionicle is it's ABS plastic and polycarbonate plastic for the transparent parts, parts, molded and manufactured by the Lego group, and marketed and sold as Lego sets with the Lego logo on them. And these parts, although very somewhat different in style than conventional, what you would think as Lego, where each individual part is unassuming and they only become a model when they're combined as a whole, they actually had some sort of completedness in each individual part. We'll get into what that means later. So it's very different in like tone and nature than like Lego bricks. It was interfaceable with them. It's very easy to interface Bionicle parts with Technic, and it's easy to interface Technic parts with System, and therefore you can interface the Bionicle pieces with System or Technic pieces. So it fits into the system, although in somewhat of a peripheral way. So is it Lego? For all intents and purposes, yes. Is it the Lego that you grew up with and love? Well, that's up to you. It depends on what your life story is. And that's all that is. There's nothing much to say there. Will Bionicle win? Well, it doesn't seem likely. That being said, though, for the original poll, there are many categories, and you were allowed to vote for up to 3, which means that the amount of votes cast for each category, like, there could be, people are voting for multiple categories, right? So if one category beats another by, like, a vote, well, it might, instead of it being, like, half the people voted for this one, half the people voted for the other, it's like all of the people voted for both, right? So it's not like you can just add up the votes for all the other things besides Bionicle and say, okay, that's the support that's anti-Bionicle. Because though people can put multiple answers in those polls, and people could actually, like me, have given an answer to a theme, Bionicle and another theme together. So, but they would have picked Bionicle as their first choice between the two. So you're going to get seeing votes. So, but then the second poll, you can only vote for one. So you might see some of those votes disappear. So if you look at the end results of that first poll, it may look like Bionicle has no chance, but it might because, well, that poll had people voting for potentially multiples, and now they can only vote for one. Now, and then Lego decided that they made a mistake dividing up the castle into multiple themes, and so they decided the castle was all one theme, so they didn't know what to do about the votes that are already cast, so they decided we're just going to put castle in as one of the finalists, which is fine, I guess. I mean, what that does is that it kind of, if the votes coalesce against Bionicle, well, the anti-Bionicle votes now going to end up split between more categories than it would originally. And so Lego, by doing that, has made it more likely for Bionicle to win because you can only vote for one, and now there are 3 things that are not Bionicle and one that is. So the chance that Bionicle could win that vote is very high, and the controversy and vitriol that would follow if that happened is going to be hilarious. It'll be so silly. Just imagine the 90th anniversary of Lego set being something Bionicle. They'll figure out a way to work it out. They'll make it some sort of, like, Ninjago City-like thing. It'll actually be System or something. Because I think Lego itself is going to find that weird if that happens. That being said, a lot of the Bionicle fans are just kind of mad at Lego. Like, oh, we're going to show Lego that Bionicle is still popular. That's why we're voting for Bionicle. We'll let them deal with what the set actually is going to be. They'll deal with those funky logistics. Yes, it's getting annoying because I'm taking a long time to do this room because I'm talking while doing it instead of focusing solely on completing the room. Now, given the poll priority closed on the time of recording, this is going to be uploaded probably a week after I recorded this, so the results of those are going to be published, and this is going to be irrelevant information anyway. Well, it'll be interesting looking back on it, see what someone said on the backside. Now, of course, I did log in again for the second round to vote Bionicle in the second round just for fun. So now Bionicle has become the hose rinks of Lego. with regards to the hose rinks fiasco, like, I listened to TTV's podcast, or at least most of it they made, like, after the contest, and there's something that Invictus, forgot his name, anyway, his screen name is Tenebrae Invictus, said, and that is, he was kind of off the cuff. It wasn't a very well-prepared speech about his vetting procedure for votes. And he said that, he made this comment saying like, this guy might be part of the community, I don't know. And it made it sound like he had a different criteria, like more criteria for disqualifying votes besides just simply one person voted for multiple times, right? So it would make sense that if one person somehow made dupe accounts, or used a bot, and cast multiple votes, despite being one voter, that's some sort of voter fraud that's against the whole concept of a vote, which is to determine what's more popular, right? Now you have something that's... So, it makes sense that you disqualify votes if, there was one person casting more than one vote. We would call that fraud, usually, in politics. However, Envy said that there might have implied with that statement that there might have been other criteria. Well, how could there be other criteria? I would think one vote would be one vote. Even if some random, person from India, which there might have been Bionicles sold in India, I don't know, from, a remote tribe who knew nothing of Lego or Bionicle or anything, just happened, for some random unknown reason, vote in that... make a TTV message board account and vote in that poll for some entry, then I would presume that vote would count, because that's just how things, I would guess that they would work, right? I mean, so this kind of gets into this idea, or a soapbox of mine, that I sometimes bring up in my head. I haven't talked about it in public very much, though. It's the first time I'm making a big rant about this, and that is, in sports or any sort of game or contest, the idea of not clearly defined rules. So, or too many rules. So, let's bring up powerlifting, for example. So we have, and this may be, this is like the easiest example, cookie cutter example I can come up with for this. There are 3 lifts in powerlifting. Actually, there are more, but there are 3 mainstream lifts that you find in almost every powerlifting competition. There's some, obscure ones like overhead pressing and strict curl and things like that. But there are 3, main ones, and that is squat, bench, and deadlift. So what constitutes a lift in deadlift is the bar has to be in front of you, and the bar has to go from the ground to a lockout position, which is with your body is stacked, right? Shoulders on top of your hips, on top of your knees, on top of your feet, holding the bar in front of you. And you have to go from the ground to that position with no negative motion. So you can't bring it from the ground, set it back down, and try again. You can't have it hitching. You can't let it drop again. So it has to be keep going up and keep going up and keep going up until you reach lockout. Those are pretty easily defined rules, right? It's pretty clear whether or not you locked it out. It's not perfectly clear because people's bodies have different geometries, and sometimes you can get a tricky body geometry where it's hard to tell if something was really a lockout. But I never really seen complaints in powerlifting about, bad calls on lockouts on deadlifts. Strongman is a different story, but in powerlifting, not so much, right? Because what constitutes a lift for the deadlift is pretty well defined. It's pretty cut and dry criteria, right? This or that. The bench also pretty much cut and dry. You have to start with the bar on top of you. It has to touch your chest. Your butt has to be on the bench. Your back has to be on the bench. You have to wait for the press command. Once after you say press, you press it, and it goes up with no back up to a lockout, which is the elbows are straight with no negative motion, and that's a lift. And it's, there's, range of motion controversy with the current rules for bench press, but at least the rules are clear, and I haven't really heard of very many bad calls for bench press. But then there's something called the squat. And the squat is more complicated because now you have something called depth. And what is depth? right? It's something that's kind of... people try to make it rigid, right? The IPF rules, crease of the hips, top of the kneecap. But in that moment, judging if the crease of the hips, top of the kneecap is difficult. It's not really cut and dry, even though it sounds cut and dry. And so there's complaining and vitriol all over the internet about this squat was too high, or this squat was perfectly fine and they called it not depth, and so on. Because that lift has a criteria in it that it's harder to define, and it's less cut and dry, it's harder to judge easily. And that's just not good. It makes sports less fun when you promote controversy due to hard to define, like not very well rigidly defined rules. Now, the squat's a very great lift for building general strength, and I recommend people do squats. But it's a very hard lift to judge in competition, of course. It kind of upsets people when you make criteria for something that doesn't have seemingly a very rigid definition, like what constitutes a legitimate vote in a Bionicle Cannon contest. Well, it's someone who's part of the Bionicle community. Well, what does that mean? Do you have to present your Bionicle community ID card? Like, it's something that's not easily definable in a rigid way, that in itself invites controversy. Now I gotta focus on doing this part, so I'm gonna shut up a bit to focus here. Now, I'm not someone who personally thought that Hose Rinks was a good mock, or really should have been the canon representation of Hell Rinks. However, if Hose Rinks got more votes than the other entries, then it should have won. And this whole joke entries don't count thing is also a problem, because, not necessarily because there's a bad spirit to that, but because, what's a joke entry? Where's the line between a joke entry and not a joke entry? Like, how do you determine this? It's not very rigidly definable criteria. So, I can make something that's kinda sorta a joke entry depending on your opinion. Now what's that, right? So, yeah. We decide to make a rule against something's bad faith. Well, how are you going to define what exactly is bad faith, right? It's going to be another matter of opinion. So every time you make contests or sports, it's important that you make your rules things that aren't very, to put constraints around your contest and put necessarily thinking into it in order to limit rules that are kind of subjective and wishy-washy, and make sure everything is rigidable. And TTV isn't really doing a very good job at that. They don't really understand the importance of rigidness in rules. They do to some degree, right? They don't make exceptions for people because their mock is good if they break an obscure rule, but not as much as I would judge them, as I think they should. I don't want to get too up their case, but that was not perfectly ideal there with how they handled that, or how they're handling that. Okay, so we have one more area to go to, and this area you don't have to ever even touch if you don't want the yellow color paint tool. I want the yellow color paint tool, not necessarily because I want to color my block yellow, but because, let me check the recording status. Okay. But because, well, I don't like the idea of doing this game and not doing everything there is to do in it. So, if it's a thing to do, it will get done. I will win. The enemies are purple, though, in level 4. I will wear it the whole time, because yellow is a very good contrast with purple. Another thing that I tend to kind of rave against, casually is rules creep and too many rules. So oftentimes in sports, fans of the sport will complain about something not looking like how they think the sport should look. And so they'll try to insist on new rules being added. The problem with it is that oftentimes a lot of the fun in sports and games is being able to use your mind to come up with new innovative techniques to help you win, right? Phooey on chivalry. I will never be chivalrous. So that's part of the fun of things. So there's a couple examples. The most one of the most on the top of my mind of this is arm wrestling. There's a move in arm wrestling called the King's Move, which is basically where you go to a very outside position, which is kind of arm wrestling jargon. That means you have, well, you'll have to see a picture. You have a tendency to turn your entire arm inward, so force internal rotation. Put the elbow somewhat not really point down on the pad, but like the side of your elbow on the pad. And make it such that to pin you makes you have to kind of bend your elbow the wrong way. So it's a very defensive position. You can't really pin from it. You have to be able to climb back out in order to pin. And usually when we do the King's Move, your torso is very low, like down under the table. Now, this is a technique that you can employ if you can use your brain, know how to do the right timing and implement it. And people who are in wrestling don't complain about their competitors doing the King's Move. But fans tend to complain because it makes the arm wrestling not look like how it's supposed to look, how they want it to look. Which would then require, and then think about what it would require to make the King's Move no longer comply with the rules. You'd have to make some sort of rule that had some rigid criteria that was easy to make calls on as to would prevent the King's Move. And many of the ideas are just make it so your shoulder has to be off the table. Well, what's a shoulder, right? It's another one of those crease of the hips, top of the kneecaps things where it's going to be a hard call. So, not a fan of that kind of attitude and that way of thinking. It's more fun to arm wrestle if you're one of the competitors if you have fewer rules you have to dodge around, and it's not like it's funner to watch a sport where there's fewer fouls, right? It wins like you win by pinning somebody in arm wrestling, not by fouling out. No one likes to see fouls. If you make more rules, that makes more breaking of the rules, which makes more fouls, which makes the game less pure looking and more fouls, basically. Not a fan of that kind of thinking. So, also, this is somewhat less common, but I've heard people complain about split jerking in strongman. But you tend to find that strongmen don't split jerk that often, even though it's complies with the rules, because split jerking, especially with those rigid implements, is hard on your knees. That's why Martins Lisi's used to split jerk a lot, and now he doesn't because his knees. So it may be something that the rules allow, but isn't something really is done very often. But people complain about it. Why? Because it doesn't look how they want it to look, basically. It's like inability to use your brain to develop new techniques in order to lift the weight, new and creative ways, makes the sport less fun to watch and to do. So, I don't like rules creep. Back when I was in middle school, I had this church function where me and a whole bunch of girls were playing half-court basketball, and the director said no rules, which I don't know what that means, but those girls did not want to play no rules. They kept insisting I follow certain rules. I didn't really complain back at them too much, but I wasn't happy about that. Okay, so this room, I'm going to have some cracks at it in this recording session, till this recording session goes up to about an hour. Right now it's only a little over a half hour. Yeah, the menu popped up because I was clicking off the game to check how much time I've been recording. But this level is infamous for if you have to do a bunch of pieces in sequence, each individual one not very difficult, but all of them at once in a series without messing up, yes, difficult. To get that yellow color skin. First time I did this, it took me many days in order to finish this segment. Now, that's not very well conducive to Let's Playing when you have something that takes days of tries to complete. So, I will go till an hour doing this, but very likely I'm going to have rejected footage. It's just a series of deaths. It's never going to be posted. Just because posting footage of this there's no way I'm going to be able to do this fast enough to make this practical. To actually include all of the footage. Ugh. Oh, I stalled. That's gonna get me. Okay, first part. Ah. Some time ago, I had this idea. So, basically, for reasons, I want to learn and to become very proficient at performing calculations and understanding the concepts of Einstein's general relativity, quantum field theories, that is quantum electrodynamics and quantum chromodynamics, as well as electroweak theory, and mathematics such as differential geometry and abstract algebra. Differential geometry, I only need to know enough to be able to do Einstein's general relativity, but also abstract algebra. So I thought, well, how am I going to hold myself accountable in order to learn this? And there's two kind of factors here. One is, I have a different YouTube channel I would actually do this on. Post all my learning on YouTube. Just do it. That's fun, right? And everybody likes YouTube and posting things on it. Or at least I do. I'm kind of getting addicted to doing that now. And there's a second reason why I would do that, and that is not that anybody would actually watch that, it's just fun to post it, even if no one watches it. And I typically don't get discouraged by no one watching things, I just keep posting. What was I saying? Oh, there's this phenomenon you'll find that sometimes if you're stuck and have a hard time figuring out how to do a problem, you try to explain to somebody what you're trying to do, how you're stuck, and what your ideas are and how to solve it that are not working. You can all of a sudden figure it out. Because it sometimes helps to vocalize what you're trying to do, as well, instead of just having it circling around inside your head. So, it's useful to ask your mom for help on your homework, even if it's something that's way beyond your mom's knowledge level, because you try to explain it to your mom, and then you get it. So if you're trying to learn something that sometimes is kind of challenging and difficult for you to learn, and you want to learn it really well, you make this video, even if no one watches it, where you just explain it. You just explain it in a video and post it. And that helps you learn, right? As long as you put a disclaimer at the front of the video saying I'm learning this, I don't have a degree in it, don't, whatever. Copy me at your own risk. Now, for some disciplines, that's kind of fun. You can make up example problems that you won't find in any textbooks, or you take example problems in textbooks and you change all the numbers and the topology around, and you make it such that, it's so difficult to cheat for people to cheat using your videos. But say if I were trying to make videos of just me trying to learn how to do abstract algebra really well. Well, there's only so many abstract algebra problems in the universe, and it's hard to not... I could take my book, I won't tell you which book it is for reasons. I can work through all the problems of the book. It's going to be really hard for me to change the problems, because a lot of them is going to be prove this theorem. So I can't just change the numbers around in the problem and it works. So what would happen is if I were just doing like abstract algebra homework on recording and recording it, then guaranteed you could copy me to do your homework. Now, so I googled some stuff before doing this recording, like about like problem solving on the internet, and people complaining about the ethical implications of apps that can give you step-by-step solutions to your math homework. At least at the university level for me, I always thought that, whatever, it's silly to ask students to turn in their homework anyway. I mean, that's up to them. It is the test or the exam where you determine whether or not they learn the material or not the homework. To me, turning in homework and grading it is silly and obsolete. So, whatever. But I don't have control of those factors, so if I make it like this video of me doing all the problems in my abstract algebra book, then someone could theoretically use my videos to do their abstract algebra homework themselves and copy from me. Now, I wouldn't get any trouble for that because I'm not going into universities or anything right now. But I'd be kind of a scumbag, potentially. And I was I was working on my graduate degree. I had this class that where the professor gave a take-home test, and he wrote at the top of the take-home test, duration 3 hours. And I looked at that and I thought, well, this is really silly. It's a take-home test. Why would it have a duration? So I emailed the professor, like you usually would, and said, this test says duration 3 hours at the top. Like, do you actually expect me to only take 3 hours to do it? And he said, yes, only take 3 hours to do it. Now, this is, like, I was like, well, none of the other students are going to only take 3 hours to do it. For two reasons. One, they're not going to read that part. Two, they're going to read it, they're going to think it's just some, like, vestigial thing from some old in-class exam, and they don't actually have to follow it. Or three, they're just going to knowingly cheat it. Or four, they're going to cheat because they think that that's the only way they can beat the curve because everybody else will also cheat. So I got there sitting like in this weird like moral hypothetical, which turned out to not be hypothetical, where it's like everybody else will cheat and get away with it. Should I cheat or not? Now I ended up only taking 3 hours on the exam. More like 3 hours and a couple minutes extra, but 3 hours basically. And I did all I could in 3 hours, and of course I didn't finish, and I did pretty poorly relative to the rest of the class. And the professor was of course amazed that everyone finished, and I was like, yeah, I know why everyone finished. I didn't complain to him or anything, because I'm too shy for that kind of thing, but that was silly. It's like, are you bored yesterday? Do you know what would happen if you gave a take-home test that's supposed to have a finite duration? What are you thinking? What kind of nonsense is this? You got to understand the fundamental natures of humanity. Anyway, it's the exam where you don't have your phone, you don't have any computers, you're just sitting in the room with a paper, a writing utensil, and maybe a calculator. What can you do right there? That's what determines whether or not the student learns something or not, right? We don't need to grade homework, especially not on the university level. Yet still, in university classes, I had homework where the classes, even at the graduate level, where the homework was graded, and it was silly. So it's just not really tractable and practical anymore. But I'm sort of like mulling that over, like how am I going to do this abstract algebra thing, because I don't want to do people's homework for them. But I'll probably just do it and do their homework for them. It'll be a fun thing to like take snippets from to use as memes or something, because that's one of those math disciplines where it's like not English. It's quite the the lingo was quite funny. You can make the most ununderstandable sentences possible. If any of you are familiar with groups, I don't know how much of the audience of this video has been taking a class on groups. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you haven't. Even with that hose ring thing, even somebody I know very well, I suspect has some issues with intellectual, like, inconsistency, because they said, you know, all you guys complaining because hose rinks lost, you know, TTV put so much work into this, and, like, they did the best they can, they did such a good job, and stop, you know, hating on them. It's like, yeah, if hose rinks would have won, you would have said something completely different. The outcome that you wanted is what happened. That's what I know you. I know why you wrote that. Nothing to do with appreciation for the hard work of TTV. Anyway. Seem like the only person who can separate my, like, the outcome I want from, like, the, like, ethics of things. Everybody thinks they can, but they don't. Okay, this part seems to be messing me up a lot for some reason. So I tend to hit yeah, I tend to hit that one, so maybe I want to start a little higher. Attempt to clear it. Oh, gee. Why am I going this way first? Yeah, I need to go, like, to the... Well, I guess I'm doing it just for practice, so I'll keep doing it. But I need to actually, in the final run, I have to actually go to the right first, because... Moving the cursor, I need to go to the right, because that's the dead end that way. Going to the left actually leads to the end. See, how long has this been? Okay. I recall this part's kind of hard. Okay, so did that part at least. Breaking up into manageable sized chunks. Let's try the right side. Ooh. Just getting reminded about how ridiculous this is. This requires some patience. The way I think of myself, it always seems like I have this, when it comes to patience, in some ways I'm extremely patient. In other ways I am very much impatient. And I would like to believe that the reason why I'm very impatient about some things is just because I only have, the expression is 70 years with reason of strength 80 to live. And then capped at max 120 or whatever. But up to 120 years to live, the last 30 of those years would be not in very good health, of course. So you only have so much time on Earth to do things on Earth before you get called up or down. And so I tend to rush things, I would think, for that reason. But when it comes to challenges in games like this, you just gotta do them over and over again until you get it, which may take some time. Bringing back in the subject of is there carryover from video games to real life and skills? The answer is no. Except if you play the World's Hardest Game 3 and you get this yellow color skin thing, you might be able to demonstrate perseverance or just keep trying at something until it works, until you get it, right, and not giving up. That's something that does have carryover. So and somehow not mess up this launch and get caught on that circle to my right. But if you're wondering why I'm just jamming into that wall up there, it's because you don't actually have time, if I remember correctly, on that part to just turn 90-degree corners. You actually have to cut all the corners, otherwise you don't have time to get the key in time. It's for all of these runs, the margins are extremely tight. Okay. Not as tight as I thought they would be, okay. And you may hear me a lot complaining about education in the United States and how the education in the United States doesn't respect the idea that you only have at max 120 years to live, and how much of a crime it is to waste people's time. So, of course, think that it should specialize you sooner and not waste your time writing documents about books that no one really cares to read outside of school in formats that no one will care to read. That's how I like to describe it. It's important that you know how to read and write, but not read and write essays about literature, because no one would read essays about literature. So it's a completely impractical skill, which only circulates inside academia itself. Right? The only people who read essays are the people that write essays. So that time spent, teaching the nonsense, can be used to teach people, well, how do you take out a loan? How do you start a business? Like, or how to do your job you're eventually going to get. And I know it's somewhat stressful right now, like, at least in the United States, the age is 18, I don't know where it is in the rest of the world, where the world suddenly goes, okay, you have no idea what you want to do for your career, you have no idea what you want to do with your life, now suddenly you have to know. Pick something. So it might be too much to ask small kids what they want to do with their life. That's kind of restrictive. However, usually, you know what you don't want to do, right? When I was a small kid, I knew I didn't want to be a lawyer. I knew I didn't want to be a journalist. I know I didn't want to be these things where I have to write a bunch of baloney. I knew I didn't want to be a novel writer. So I knew I didn't want to be a dancer. I knew I didn't want to be an actor. Oh, the money's nice, but it's not something I enjoy doing. So, like, I knew I could specialize somewhat, right? I could specialize to math, to science and engineering, to programming, to music, to, like, doctor kind of things, so, like, biology. Because I had it narrowed down to, like, doctor or engineer or musician or something like that, right? So I knew what categories to go down to. And so, I still think that you should be allowed to do that if you know that information. Anyway. But right now we just kind of hold people back and waste their time and teach them a bunch of impractical things they don't need to know. Don't get me wrong, it's very important to know how to write. It's just the format, the essay, that is commonly taught in, like, high school English classes in the United States today is not a practical format for writing, and it's never written on practical subject matter for which to write. And so, it's not a very useful kind of writing. It's okay to teach writing, just don't teach time-wasting writing. Yeah, I decided to do another practice of the left side. Ah! I had this glimmer of hope that it actually finished the whole room there. It got dashed. Why should I ever have hope that I should finish this room? What good does that do? So anyway, I finished recording Matoran Adventures, which means that I'm almost done with Bionicle 2002. There's another file on the Bionicle Media project called Matanui Explorer. It doesn't really seem like that's going to be an actual game, it's just like a guide. But it's some interactive thing that if I want to make sure I cover all my bases, I'll play, quote-unquote. But if I do that, then that means I finished 2002. And that's not like kind of a caveat thing like 2001. I'll have most definitely finished 2002 in its entirety. And then I'll move on to 2003, which means I have to move on to Bionicle Elite Game GBA. Ugh. Well, it's not really, it's in that, not that it's a bad game, like some people say, it's just because that's difficult. And so it's going to be like me playing this room on this level of this game, where it's going to be hard to record and make a good Let's Play of it. And it's going to be kind of, not necessarily blind, but first time playing kind of thing, so it's not going to be well practiced. I'm of course going to hold off on like the big games like big retail games like Bionicle the Game and Bionicle Heroes until I have a better PC system on which to play them. I mean, I do have a 1060 mobile, and those games were released in 2003 and 2006, which are before the 1060 mobile, so I guess I should have a good enough graphics card for them. For, like, by all logic. It's mid-range from, like, the 2017 era, so should sound great, but I don't want to take any chances with it, especially when I'm recording it. Yeah, 1060 should be fine for Bionicle the Game. I mean, it worked fine for Legend of Matanui, so you would think it would work fine for Bionicle the Game. And Legend of Matanui is a notoriously, like, resource-intensive thing for the era in which it was released. It's kind of ridiculously hard to run. My like, I have a computer that was, I guess I forgot what era, like 2013-ish, that had a hard time running it. Given it didn't have a good graphics card, it had like embedded graphics or something. So having a nice graphics card helps with those kind of things. And I might play Legend of Matanui again if I have a better graphics card and see, like, how that changes the experience and the recording and the file size. The monster file sizes. And upgrading the internet is something I thought of, but it's going to take some money to do that. It's possible, though. I'm somewhat willing to spend the money just so I can get big files moved around. It might get worth it depending on certain things paying back. Yeah, I definitely have no aspirations to ever be a professional YouTuber. That being said, I do have things that I think, if I actually start recording them, will have a much bigger draw and much bigger audience than, like, Bionicle games. I'll have to experiment and see if that's actually the case. Abstract algebra is definitely not one of them, unless it becomes a meme. But you can never really hope for a meme. Like, those just come naturally, right? You can't really make them intentionally. That's not how memes work. Make a turn. Oh, some other random news. one of my Vinog, my Voyanui online game videos. It's part 8, chapter 4 quests. Has peaked over 30 views, and is becoming my most viewed video as opposed to Monog 1.5. And so I was trying to figure out why this particular episode had such a high amount of views when the other episodes only had about 5 views on average. This one had over 30. Like, why is there more views by a factor of 6? And YouTube has some analytics, and they can tell you where the views come from. Like, they tell you, are they from in-screens? Are they from people's recommendeds? Are they from some external sources and embeddings? Where are they coming from? And subscriptions, whatever. And that video, these views being piped in, it says they're coming in from something external. So they're coming in from some link to the video or some embedding of it somewhere. They're not coming from an in-screen or people's recommendeds. Now, it's always sad to see that because you're like, yeah, I would like to see my stuff appear in people's recommendeds. I guess it's not. But that's really, like, weird and curious. Like, who's piping views into that one specific episode? That's the episode where I accidentally had the microphone muted for the first 6 minutes. And it's awkward. And then I say, like, something about, like, I fixed the mouse problem, or, you know what I mean. But, so somehow, somewhere, there's a link that keeps piping views into that one video. I doubt the person who knows where this link is and what's piping in the views will ever watch this particular video, especially up to this point, which is like 40 minutes in. Actually, probably further than that. I'm not gonna bother looking at the time. Phantom views. So it's not one of those YouTube algorithm is junk things, because it's like, I mean, YouTube algorithm is drunk things. Oh, I forgot that one key. Oh, yeah, I forgot you have to get it. Ugh. Well, should I go back for it, or should I just go to the end as an exercise? I'll go to the end as an exercise. Okay, so you have to actually go get this key, which is obnoxious, but we'll get it. Oops. There we go. Okay, so I have to do that too. No, another thing to pile onto the list of things I have to do. So, because I need to think of more things to say while I fill out this, well, okay, it's already over an hour. Fill out these trials at this, unusually difficult room. If you haven't heard of the, Wolf Contraforte, then you're not a nerd, and you may want to stay that way. But, being a contrabassoonist, maybe not professionally, I will go for it if I can get good enough. Like, if I can get good enough at bassoon, that I can pass an audition to get into music school. Like, if I get that good, I will do it. I will not hold back. But the question is if I can actually ever get that good. Which I accept that I may not be able to do that, right? It could be a Sibelius situation where she acknowledges he won't be a good enough violinist, and so whatever. But some of that stuff is genetic. Like, some people you just can't get good enough, no matter how hard you try. Given I would try as hard as I can. But at least, like, local community orchestras and bands and stuff would like to have fun playing bassoon, right? Like, I can't really do it right now because the situation with health on this date, February 7th, 2021, to date the video. I don't know why that's such a crime to date the video, but I just dated it. Some sort of meme, don't date the video. I think what that probably originated is, don't put stuff in your video that makes it so it's only relevant to a certain point of time, so that you, like, lose relevancy. That's called dating the video. Somehow that evolved into, don't say the date a video is recorded. I'm very good at dating videos, though. So I just, like, at least mess around with it, right? Like, you know, at local universities and things, you know, if they have publicly open orchestras or publicly open wind ensembles to play some bassoon, just as a hobby. Because it's an instrument that I, of course, really like the sound and character of. Not necessarily very powerful, which is a drawback, but very comfortable sounding, very much like an old man telling you a story by a fire kind of sound. If you play it well. So there's something I know about in this topic of bassoons and discussion, is back in the early 2000s, Benedict Appelgym and Guntram Wolf. So Benedict Appelgym is this dude in Germany who owns this small shop where he manufactures and custom makes musical instruments that tend to be saxophone-like. So they tend to have metal bores, usually conical, but he does make a clarinet with 2 bore sizes that's cylindrically bored, with very large tone holes in relation to the size of the bore, like a saxophone, right? Saxophone is a conical metal bore with very large tone holes in comparison to the bore size, in comparison to other woodwind instruments. That's what gives the saxophone its powers, its large tone holes, as opposed to a bassoon, which has small tone holes. And large tone holes do have drawbacks. I'll get another rant about that. But so a bassoon maker in Germany named Guntram Wolf, I think he passed away. I don't know if Guntram Wolf's actually still alive, but his family still keeps the business going. The company's still around. He decided to contact a couple professors from the University of Munich, or like some German university, at Benedict Appelgym, to help create some instrument that was designed specifically to replace the contrabassoon in major orchestras worldwide. Like, it was intended to be marketed such that it would actually replace the contrabassoon in the orchestra. Now, this isn't that new of a thing. During the time of the late Romantics of Berlioz, right? The orchestration in brass has changed a lot. The orchestra changes, and changes often. It's just how life works. So the brass section in a modern orchestra is quite a bit different and more sophisticated than it was at the time of Beethoven, for example. The strings change less. They have been made steel as opposed to pig guts and longer finger bridges, but you still see 4-string instruments, so violin, violoncello, bass. They play the same parts as they did back at the time of Beethoven. But the brass change way more dramatically often, and the woodwinds change in between in dramaticness. So replacing an instrument in an orchestra with another one isn't something that's too weird. It might happen less often nowadays in the 21st century, but it can happen. So he wasn't completely dreaming with this idea. The reason why I wanted to replace the contrabassoon was because the contrabassoon, I actually played a contrabassoon. because they're so expensive. It's hard to actually play one. But apparently, they're difficult to play more than one dynamic, which, since I've played on a regular bassoon, I can say it's hard to play more than one dynamic on a regular bassoon, because I've played on a saxophone and a bassoon. I can tell you that with the saxophone, you can play rather loud and rather soft. Usually you play loud rather than soft, because it's way more fun to do that, but you can also play a saxophone softly. Believe it or not, it's possible, even though no one does it. Whereas, and actually not that hard to do either, just people don't. Whereas the bassoon, you can play it somewhat more loudly and somewhat more softly, depending on how nice your reed is. It depends on the reed a lot. Some reeds are stubborn and like to play one dynamic. Some of them let you, flex the dynamic some more. It's pretty tough to do dynamics on a bassoon. It's very often I'll just play one volume. And I have reeds so stubborn that they really will only play one volume. But they're still good for practicing my finger technique, because they make sound easily enough that I can still keep practicing on them without burning out my embouchure. But it's hard to do dynamics with them, because they're not the best reeds. So that's one thing with the contrabassoon. That effect is apparently even worse. And so there's some motivation to make something like a contrabassoon, but bring in some of that characteristics of a saxophone. You can play lower loudly and more softly by giving it larger tone holes in relation to the bore and a larger bore. Also, the key system on the contrabassoon is even more janky than that on the bassoon, but who cares about... The reason why people play bassoons is because of their janky key system, not... It doesn't detract, so I don't know if that's really a big deal or not. But it's very dated and very janky. So he came up with this instrument that's like a contrabassoon. This has its place in the same range as a contrabassoon. Also uses a double reed, a metal bocal, a wooden body with many turns, and a extremely similar fingering, although not exactly the same fingering scheme as to that of a contrabassoon. But took some inspiration from the saxophone. Has a more wider bore spread. Larger tone holes, and it might actually be that the bore is cut off with a smaller in length cone remaining than the regular contrabassoon, so you have room for the extra flageolet key. But despite that, because the bore taper is so much wider, the amount of volume taken up by that cone is actually bigger. So the reed has to be bigger for ideal reed sizing. And the thing that stands out in my mind the most about this instrument is its appearance. It looks amazing. It's eye candy to the extreme. And the question would be, does it sound as good as it looks? To which, although I listened to multiple recordings of this thing, really can't really have enough information to form an opinion on that. There's a recording of, there's a video on YouTube. I'm on Louis Lipnick's channel, and also, maybe the Mayo Clinic's channel. It's basically, Louis Lipnick playing a solo with his contrabassoon and piano accompaniment in the lobby of the Mayo Clinic, which is a famous hospital. And he's playing a solo called Into the Deep. Which, if you ever heard of the song that has the lyrics, What wondrous love is this, oh my soul, what wondrous love is this, oh my soul. It's actually I forgot the verses for it, but it's a Christian hymn. It kind of rips off that melody in the middle of it. Anyway, called Into the Deep. So you can listen to him play Into the Deep in the lobby of the Mayo Clinic, and the acoustics, of course, are not the best because it's the lobby of a hospital. So the recording quality isn't really the best. And you can see Louis Lipnick trying to kind of flex the dynamic range of his contraforte, and he's playing intentionally very softly sometimes. And then he oddly takes part of it at the end an octave down, maybe to flex his low range or something. Into the Deep is a pretty high piece for contrabassoon. If you look at the sheet music for it, it's it plays up the upper tenor register, which because it's a contrabassoon, not a bassoon, I guess you could call it the bass register. It's a tenor register written the same way on a bassoon. Bassoon plays as written, contrabassoon 1 octave lower than written, you know what I mean. Then, after listening to it, you can listen to Richard Bobo play the exact same solo on a conventional contrabassoon. And if you do it in that order, Richard Bobo's recital, where he plays Into the Deep on a contrabassoon, which is a Mollenhauer contrabassoon, with an old-style contrabassoon key system. It doesn't have any of those extra key system innovations like the Fox system or anything like that, or the Kronwalt contrabassoon. It's just a Mollenhauer contrabassoon. It sounds so much better than Louis Lipnick on the contraforte. So much better. Now if I listen to them in the opposite order, they sound about the same in goodness. Which is kind of so. I guess if in one order one sounds so much better, and the other order they sound about the same, the so much better wins. And so Into the Deep for contrabassoon and piano just sounds so much better on an old contrabassoon than it does on a contraforte, despite the contraforte looking so amazing. Given that's a very high piece, maybe on the low end it might be better. But that's kind of the thing, though. That's where the contraforte tends to shine, is in the low notes, more so than the middle notes. So maybe if you had a lower piece to compare them, the contraforte might sound better. But it's sort of like this debate. I'm not so convinced that the contraforte actually sounds better, well played, than a contrabassoon. So I kind of agree with Richard Bobo, who said that's what he thought as well. Now, given it is easier to play, supposedly, and I haven't heard anybody argue with that, and of course, it's such eye candy. I can stare at that thing for several minutes. The same part of my brain that made me like Bionicle. It's that part of the brain that makes me like contrafortes. But I'm not super convinced it actually sounds better. So... Now, also, it sounds better. It's like, what do you mean by that? It might be more practically useful in an orchestra, because you might want to, because more dynamic range is useful in a modern orchestra. So you might go, okay, in the context of a big instrumentation, it might be better, even if it's not as better on its own, right? There's so many other factors you need to figure in. So it's very unlikely the contraforte will actually succeed in replacing the contrabassoon. But it's something I think about sometimes, almost exclusively because of its appearance. It makes you kind of want one in this really stupid, vain way. I think they cost about $50K to buy new, so it's a lot of money to save up for something like that. It only costs about $30K to buy a brand new Fox contrabassoon. You don't really have to buy a new bassoon. That's something that most people buy used or as a hand-me-down, just because bassoon and bassoon family instruments are so expensive. Of course, I didn't have a relative that played bassoon before me, so I had to buy my bassoon straight up. That's why I don't have a very expensive bassoon. It's wood, it's not plastic. That's as far as that's the best compliment I can give it. The least expensive bassoon I could get from a brand that I trusted that wasn't plastic, it was actually maple wood. Because those plastic bassoons, they just don't cut it. Listening to recordings and videos of them, it's just not... it has to be wood. Otherwise, it's just going to be frustrating to play on. And that's as much as I could afford. So, not anytime soon I'm going to be chunking down 30 grand on a contrabassoon. Maybe if I get lucky financially at some point later in my life. And part of the reason is they're just not good enough at bassoon yet to be worthy of playing contrabassoon, right? In order to get the part as a contrabassoonist in a major orchestra, well, the contrabassoonist, there's not always a contrabassoon part in every single orchestra piece, right? And every single movement. you know, Beethoven 9, there's a contrabassoon part in the third movement, but not the third movement, the fourth movement, but not in the first ones. Same thing with Beethoven 5. The contrabassoon doesn't come in until the fourth movement. So the contrabassoonist on the other movements has to know how to play regular plain old bassoon. The fourth bassoonist has to play bassoon as well as contrabassoon. And so when you audition for a contrabassoon part for a major orchestra, you also have to audition on bassoon. And even if you're a slightly better contrabassoonist than some of the other guys, if that guy is a much better bassoonist, you can lose the audition. So, if, you know, to be a good contrabassoonist and have an opportunity, maybe in a local orchestra or a local thing, it's okay, but, like, to be a professional contrabassoonist, first you gotta be a really good bassoonist. I mean, so, there's merit that you want to pick up that bassoon first, not pick up the contrabassoon. Now, that doesn't really apply to other instrument families. I would encourage you, if you want to play, like, baritone saxophone or something in your high school, don't go buy a alto, go buy a baritone, right? Start there. You don't want to deal with trying to compete on alto and trying to switch and convincing your parents to buy you another instrument. That's just a pain in the butt, right? But, unfortunately, because contrabassoon is like that, in which you always have to double on the higher counterpart, no matter what, then yeah, you should go with regular bassoon first. Given that regular bassoons, though expensive, are cheaper. But if you want to be a bass clarinetist, don't start on a regular clarinet, start on a bass clarinet. That's one where you actually want to start on the instrument of interest. Not waste your time with something else. Yes, I'm sort of a classical music nerd, but if you haven't ever, listened to Beethoven 9 all the way through, okay, first of all, you don't have to be a classical music nerd to know what Beethoven 9 is. But two, go do it. Stop watching this and go do that. Necessary cultural, knowledge. Like, you should know what Beethoven 9 sounds like. At least, if not anything else. You know, we're not even getting into the Rite of Spring or anything here. Just plain old Beethoven 9. Oh! Wow. Oof. I did not think that would happen on this recording. I did not believe it. I can't believe it. It happened. Okay. I am happy now. Okay. Power of Beethoven 9. Okay. Oof. Okay, so I want to get down to, let's see here. Okay. I still haven't uploaded the part 5 yet, so I'm gonna have a hard time remembering the recording dates. I want to remember the recording dates because this is kind of a journal, right? So it's important to know what the dates are for it, and to put them in that place you put them in when you upload a YouTube video, the recording date. Ordinarily, on any other series, I don't put a recording date because it's just not relevant. some reason I can't make this transition. It's like, no, I call that chevying. Okay. Okay. Now from here it should be easy to get into the level. Finish off the level in this recording session, which is the best I could hope for. Yay! Finally! Okay. Now we're done the easy levels, time to start the kinda hard levels. Well, I'll end this recording session here, and we're gonna see what this resolution experiment yielded. If you watched all that, thank you for watching it.